All righty. Well, thank you for joining us today on our presentation about what we call the ultra high net worth playbook. We're glad you're here. There's about 40 or so people on the call. Thrilled to be with you today. My name is Cale Dowell. I'm Chief Operating Officer here at Archetype Wealth Partners. And of course, with me, a man who most of y'all know, Jeff Thomas, our fearless leader and CEO. And we're excited to chat with you guys today about what we've learned and how we have learned to serve ultra high net worth clients. So Jeff, why don't you kick us off with why we're even doing this?
Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Cale. Great to be with you. Even in this world of remote everything, right? Thanks for tuning in. We know people are kind of tired of the virtual world. We're ready to get back to live as well, but we are blessed by this technology to be able to have people from really all over the country join us. So thank you for tuning in. We thought we'd just sort of frame it for everybody real quick that, this idea of these webinars, and we're trying to do kind of one a month or so for other advisors. We feel like we don't have anything that God hadn't inspired us to deliver to clients. So we try to kind of live with an open hand with our content. And, we are a firm looking to grow and add advisors over time. But really, we know that most people listening to this won't join Archetype. But we've learned some things along the way serving this marketplace. God's given us some favor in kind of the ultra high net worth space. And we're happy to just kind of share what we've learned, our journey, if you will, because I think it's really been a journey. And so, we'll tell some stories. I'll do a lot of the storytelling, and then Cale will kind of rein me in. We'll try to definitely keep it under an hour for sure. We'll leave some time for Q&A. You want to do some ground rules, talk about chat, that kind of stuff, Cale?
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously, we like to keep these things fairly conversational. You'll see me taking down the slides here and there just so you can actually see our faces, and it's not just a screen the whole time. If you have any questions, you can use the chat feature. All of that will be anonymous, just so you're aware. We can answer questions along the way or at the end. But we're looking forward to running you through this. So those are the ground rules, and let's get started.
So maybe I'll give a little background to our journey, if you will, in this space. Before launching Archetype about 4 years ago, our team spent 25 years plus in kind of the biggest banks on Wall Street. Last stop, Morgan Stanley for 17 years. And it was always a little contentious, at least where we came from. There was a private wealth management arm at Morgan Stanley. Dean Witter actually bought Morgan Stanley. Our team went over kind of after that merger. And there was always kind of the core, which was sort of 10 million and under. And then there was private wealth that was kind of an old Morgan Stanley legacy business that was kind of 10 million plus. I think they weren't allowed to take accounts under $2 or $3 million. But really, we're supposed to really focus 10 million plus. We were kind of in the core category, but we didn't want to give up all the accounts that were below 2. So we didn't join the private wealth group. And there was always a little bit of contention between the two. If you're an advisor out there and you feel like, you'd like to move up market, maybe you have a few clients with, net worth over 10 million and you'd like to have more, we're just going to kind of share our journey, and we hope it's helpful to you. We don't divide things at Archetype between kind of who serves 10 million plus and below. We think that you can serve both 10 million plus and below, but there are some things you need to know about serving that higher net worth. There are some different services that are necessary, maybe a way of thinking. They do tend to have excess. And so we want to address kind of how do you have a conversation with those. Where we came from, at Morgan Stanley, they would encourage us, if we got a very large prospect over 10 million to kind of partner with the private wealth group. And so we did that a couple of times. Our team did that a couple of times early years. And the secret sauce, if you will, the teams that we partnered with brought around was really a host of complicated asset allocation investments, largely in the alternative space, private equity funds, hedge funds, this sort of thing. And the firm was really selling alternatives, if you will, but it was really just an investment package. It wasn't anything other than that. So they just had big minimums to get into some of these investments, but that was really the differentiator. We think the differentiator should be something very different. And that's one of the reasons we launched this firm, is to be able to have different conversations with people. We think it's the narrative and the story of these families that's the most powerful. And that's what we try to get to first. So maybe to illustrate that a little bit, Cale, you want to reframe that or just kind of cut to this video?
Yeah, let's cut to this video because I think it really kind of frames up what we're going to be talking about to a degree today. So take a listen.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is me. I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. And what else is there for me?
What's the answer?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
Thanks, Cale. I love that video. Of course, that's some years ago, right? He's won even more Super Bowls. All he's done is win more of them. I think maybe he still has the same questions. We don't know Tom Brady personally, but I started my book, Trading Up, Moving from Success to Significance on Wall Street, basically with that quote about what next from him. And that's part of really the reason that we started this firm. Not, of course, most people aren't that young, maybe when they're making the money. Of course, some of them inherited or do have that sort of sudden wealth earlier. But for the most part, our mission statement at Archetype is to help people connect their money with their purpose and help families thrive across generations. And so a lot of people that we run into can't state their purpose. Obviously, at that time of Tom's life, he was unable to do that. Now, we have kind of a biblical worldview. We have some ideas about where that satisfaction can be found, but we're not trying to hit anybody over the head with that. We know they come to us as the money people, and we try to meet them where they are and kind of earn the right to be heard, and solve the money issues that they have. Cale, if you don't mind, maybe just show that picture of the turtle on the fence post.
Absolutely.
This is actually in my office. I'm in my home office now, but at our real corporate office, this is sitting on the ledge, just looking out the window. This is from a young man that I discipled last year, and he made this for me. And the reason is he read my book, and I talk in there about feeling like I was a turtle on a fence post. I had a thing, not at 27, but closer to 32. I'm 52 now, but about 20 years ago, I started doing a lot of Bible study, and I was had that sort of dissatisfaction that Tom Brady had. He clearly had more money than I did at 32, but I had made more money than I expected to make. I'm the son of a pastor and a teacher, and had some early success in the wealth management business, and I just didn't feel a sense of satisfaction, kind of that gnawing thing that Tom Brady was talking about. And I didn't know what the answer was, so I did a bunch of Bible study. And what God revealed to me was that I was really putting money before him. And that's not a template for satisfaction. And what he really taught me was I'm to be a steward, not an owner. And my mindset had to change. Because I think I was acting, even though I'd heard those terms before, I think I was acting like an owner, like everything I had, I had worked hard for it. I worked 12 hours a day for, 12 years out of college to do this. I've had a job since I could mow a lawn, all of these things. I worked hard in college to get the right job, to develop the right clients, and worked hard for them. And I deserve this stuff. And I think as God sort of revealed to me that he owns it all, and that I was born to parents in the United States who valued education, helped pay for my education, pointed me in the right direction from education, from faith, all of these things. God gave me the body I have, the health I have, the mind I have, all of those things. No turtle got on that fence post without help. And so I sort of had a revelation for that. And then I started trying to live a more generous life. That led to a lot more joy in my life. And then this is when we started shifting to try to talk about generosity and a stewardship mentality and that kind of thing with clients. And that led to the growth of the business and ultimately the founding of Archetype, to have those kind of deeper conversations. So that's what we're going to really focus on today, is those deeper conversations. We'll hit the other areas because we know clients come to us asking about investments and strategy. But that's kind of the overall piece. Cale, you want to kind of take them a little deeper there?
Absolutely. By the way, I love, I won't say the name because we're keeping things anonymous, but someone, if you didn't see Jeff, was just said, preach it, Jeff. So you'd appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, I think to Jeff's point and kind of the context of the video as well is it's lonely at the top for a lot of these wealthy families, particularly the patriarchs, but it's the whole family unit that's connected. And what we found is a lot of times they don't have trusted people to talk to. And most advisors out there are kind of in that PWM group Jeff is talking about that's serving them. That's just, hey, okay, yeah, here's some access to some cool stuff. Here's some alternatives. We'll make you this basket of a unique portfolio. You know, you can only get here. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we found is what they're looking for, the questions they have, is wildly different than just the context or conversation around investments. And interestingly, there's statistics that support this. And so some of you on the call, y'all might have heard that statistic, that study that was done by the Williams Group that found 9 out of 10 wealthy families lose their net worth by the third generation, 70% by the second generation. So what's going on? Why is this happening? They did a follow-up study, and I'll share the screen. This is kind of what they concluded of why this failure of wealth transfer was happening, this ruining, if you will, of just the dollars and cents of someone's net worth. And 3% of it, you'll see it right there in the little middle of the screen, is due to like investment, tax, legal. The rest of it, I sum it up as kind of a breakdown of family communication. But as you'll see, some of it's inadequately prepared heirs. To me, that's a communication problem. Failure to establish family mission, that's a communication problem. So the irony is these conversations that they're both looking to have and need to have, they absolutely 100% relate to money, but it's not directly correlated with their investments. And so how do we actually create a value offering that's going to address these key areas while still doing our core job of investing their assets? And that's where we've really, I would say, honed in on and found incredible success and collaboration with these amazing ultra high net worth families we have the privilege to serve. It's very counterintuitive to what we were kind of brought up believing and learning they were looking for. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to share it today. So simplistically, this is the ultra high net worth playbook. We call this the 4 quadrants in our company. And this is literally what we do at Archetype. And we're going to break it down into each one. But the 4 key things is you've got to address their strategy, which we're careful to use that word because financial planning is important. I think some people on this call will probably agree with me. That term is very ambiguous. For some people, it's a spreadsheet. For other people, it's a Money Guide Pro plan. For other people, it's something way more intensive or somewhere in between. It's a very ambiguous term, but it's all about the strategy. We're going to unpack that. Of course, you also have to address the investments and then the things that we're talking about, back to the statistic, that are most critical. And I think what Tom Brady was perhaps referencing or lamenting is what's the bigger picture? Like, why do I have all this money? What does this world mean for me? And what's my purpose here? He's got what we believe, Jeff kind of alluded to it. I think he's got a God-sized hole in his heart. So we're not going to beat anyone over the head with the Bible, but we want to lead them to a place that we've gone. we can't force them to drink it, but addressing these issues of family and legacy, this is the value offering that they're looking for. This is the conversation they're looking to have. And executing on that is a little different than what I would say traditionally we tend to do as financial advisors. So that being said, we're going to frame up kind of each quadrant and pick it apart and share some practical, tactical, real examples of what that's looked like, at least from our perspective and our own experience. So let's take the first one of strategy. So all of these bullet points you see on the screen encompass so much information. We could camp out here for 7 webinars, but simplistically, 4 kind of big picture items that these families are looking for as it pertains to their strategy is holistic advice that accounts for the big picture. And what I mean by that is if someone's got $1 million, they're probably looking if they're going to make it. Are they going to have enough to retire? Some basic financial planning, a Money Guide Pro plan is probably going to be satisfactory for the most part for that type of client. When you've got $50 million, the question is usually not, do I have enough? The question is much broader, pertaining to what's the, of course, not just what's the purpose behind their wealth, but how are we going to build a strategy around it? And so you really have to account for the entire balance sheet, the big picture of where they're trying to go. What's the there, what's the here, and then what's the path from A to B? And that's going to not just be a paint by numbers, one track path that it might look like for smaller clients. It's a much more encompassed conversation. You've got to quarterback the advisor relationships. We'll explain that here in a story in a minute. But this is a critical component to make sure that the strategy is executed. You need to have the capacity and be encouraged to challenge and hold accountable these individuals. It's kind of ironic. I think in the big firms, you're often taught like, well, whatever they want, just do it for them. And we've learned that's actually not the case. You might lose the wrong client that way, but you're going to keep the right clients by challenging them and holding them accountable to what they say actually matters most important to them. And then the last one is how to execute philanthropy, the giving component. It never ceases to amaze me how many clients aren't aware of simple planning and strategic tools that can enable them to execute their generosity in a way that's also extremely tax advantageous. They just aren't aware. And there's been some statistics recently. I won't bother quoting them because I'll butcher it. They're not off the top of my head, or they would be off the top of my head. But I know that there's a significant uptick on the number of ultra high net worth families that are looking to talk about generosity versus the actual number of advisors engaging on the topic. So it's a really big, we've seen more and more and more ultra high net worth clients. They are coming to us for one of the key reasons is because we're going to have conversations about generosity. So that being said, Jeff, why don't you give us maybe a practical, tactical story of how this has played out? Some of these bullet points.
Thanks, Cale. One of the presentations that we do and I was thinking as we're doing this, we probably should do a webinar in each quadrant. So it's hard to keep it short, but we'll do our best, and maybe we can have a follow-up. Let us know after this if that's something you'd like to see more of. But from a strategy standpoint, the first thing that pops into my brain is that, and when Cale and I were preparing for this, we always want to talk about family and legacy first and investments and strategy last. But the reality is sometimes most people don't really come to us saying, help me with my legacy plan, is the truth. They have a money problem, okay, or an issue, and they got a plumbing problem. They're coming to the plumber to solve the problem, right? So those tend to be strategy or investment issues. And from a strategy perspective, we had a new client who came to us just saying, this is a 40 or early 40s only son of a business owner and founder and his wife. And the founder had passed away. Our client's father had passed away and left him the business. He's the president of the company now. And that business had been, valued and moved along in a trust to his son. Now, the rest of the assets were in our client's mother's name, and she needed to do a new will for those assets, also fairly significant. The company was the largest asset, but she had a significant over $10 million worth of assets that she also was seeking guidance on how to do estate planning for. And so our new client, he calls us and says, Jeff, and we always work in teams. I brought one of our team members. Will you show up at this next estate planning meeting? We're trying to figure this out for my mother. And there's multiple lawyers, financial advisors for mom, all kinds of people. And they'd already had 8 or 10 meetings before we walked in. And it is turning into alphabet soup with all kinds of trusts and all these things. And this new client, I knew him pretty well. We're in a Christian CEO group together, and I knew he had an unbelievably generous heart, and that he was thrilled to even have the business. And I know he didn't really care about these other assets, and he's the only child. And so, but they're trying to manipulate things and move it all to him. Well, we go to 2 meetings, we listen, we're taking notes on what the structure is, the whole thing, and I'm praying about this. And I just feel like the client told us he had 2 goals. Let's end this quickly. It was number 1. And can we make it simpler? He didn't know how to do it, but he just wanted to end it. And so they'd already paid tens of thousands of dollars in planning fees to the lawyers and all of this kind of thing. So anyway, I'm praying about it. I'm like, man, we're like 10 meetings deep into this thing. Am I going to blow this whole thing up? And so long story short, I felt led to just call him and our client and I said, your mom could just give all those assets to your foundation that you already have. And then we don't have to play this alphabet soup. We could end this right now. But is that too radical? And he goes, no, I love it. Let's do it. And then we called the lawyer. I called the lawyer, lead lawyer. And I said, hey, if he doesn't need all this stuff, what do you suggest he might do? We kind of knew, and they said, well, why don't we just give it to his foundation? It's a great idea. We were about to have a conference call with all these parties on again. We get on it, and I call this the 11-minute estate plan because that call was 11 minutes long. And I said to our client, hey, will you share what you were feeling and sharing with me? He said, I don't really need the money. I'm fine to give it away. And then I said to the lawyer, how might we do that? They said, let's just write a simple will that gives the money to the foundation. And any objections? Why would there be? The only person not getting money is the client. His foundation gets it. It was the end of it. We papered it. We probably saved him another $30,000 in fees. But that's an example of strategy because we knew the narrative. We're big on narrative before numbers. You're going to hear that a lot probably today. Because we knew the narrative and what was important to the client, that drove the planning. And what kind of drives us bananas a little bit is what we call the world system, where you just divide, your estate by the number of children you have. And the only question you ask is at what age do they become self-trustee? So we think that is a one-size-fits-all program that is not generally suitable for everybody. Let's understand who the client is and then design a strategy for the whole balance sheet that is custom built. Kale, can you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story, Jeff, because I think it really drives home a few of the key points. And these individuals and families that we get to deal with, they've got their balance sheet is now another business to run, and they're looking for someone that can help them think through that strategically, really as a peer rather than just a problem solver. And I feel like a lot of advisors, they become really great technicians on the $1 to $10 million kind of range of assets. But the ultra high net worth are really looking for more than just the technician. They're looking for someone that can strategize and think through and understand the big picture so that you can use the techniques you've learned to solve these types of problems, as Jeff just commented on. All right. Let's go to the next part of the playbook, investments. So a couple of different things that are key points here, and then we're going to share some stories. The first one is, as when we were at Morgan Stanley, we kept getting the question more and more, do you fully represent me? And as y'all probably know, if you're on this call, that's a hard question to answer when you're inside the big firm. You wear a lot of different hats, you have a lot of different licenses, and more and more, there was the request or the checkbox for these large families to essentially say, are you or are you not a pure fiduciary? So complete representation, I don't want to say it's a complete, absolute requirement, but you need to know that the trend is significantly going in one direction. And these big ultra high net worth families, it's becoming more and more part of their checklist of, okay, here's our list of what we need to do to work with a wealth advisor. And that's usually one of the check boxes on that list. So complete representation. Simplification, we're going to talk about this in a story, but these people's lives are complex and they're looking to help them simplify it. And there's a lot of different ways to do that with reporting and consolidation, family billing, et cetera, but also even in the way that we run the money. And that's going to be a big part of that. Advice for the entire balance sheet. This kind of goes back to strategy as well, but this particularly pertains to risk. If you're looking at the entire balance sheet, how you're going to allocate liquid assets is going to look different than how illiquid assets might be allocated based on the entire pie. So understanding and having the access to the entire balance sheet and advising on that critical component, that's what they're looking for. And then last is a principled, I often say also a repeatable process. How and why are you making investment decisions, and can the client digest it? Do they understand it? Is it relatable? So some key components to the investment quadrant, as we like to call it. And Jeff, why don't you share a story or an example of how that takes place?
Well, thanks, Gail. I think the key here, and I think we want to move on, save more time for these other quadrants, which we think is where you really get the meat of the narrative. But from an investment standpoint, we think it's exactly the opposite of what that starting story I gave you, where at the big firms, the higher net worth became actually less about the narrative and actually more about the investments. We think it's exactly the reverse. We think that the narrative becomes even more important because they have excess that they have to deal with. So from an investment standpoint, rather than making things more complicated, we're usually being asked by these families to make things more simple. They've already got complexity in all the other parts of their life. People think that having a lot of money solves problems, okay? But the people in the wealth advisory business know that it just creates more. So they already have plenty of complexity in their life. Usually on the investment side, they just want it to be simpler. And so we have come up with a proprietary way of doing that. Other people can farm it out. You gotta be good at it. It's table stakes. I'm not minimizing the importance of having great investments. You have to do it, but it's table stakes these days, in our opinion. And the biggest differentiator is going to be listening to that narrative and constructing really custom strategy for them. So I'll just give you an example. We have a client who ran a private equity firm, okay? He's got more private equity opportunities than we can shake a stick at. And so the last thing he wants is for us to bring him more private equity ideas. What he wants is simplicity. And we have a little quarterly meeting and we go over our pretty simple strategy. We think it's well thought out, but we're trying to make his life more simple. That's one of his, we asked 3 things when we got that relationship 15 years ago. What are the most important things? He said simplicity. So we think most advisors are trying to go more complex when actually clients want simplicity. So with that, let's keep it moving, Gail.
All right, well, let's move now to the next quadrant, which is family. So we'll explain this kind of more through the story, but I've got my little cartoon on the screen from Mark Anderson that I always love, which this is the rat race, right? So many people get caught up in this. And this is kind of back to the Tom Brady video. What's next? Well, I guess what's next is I just keep winning more Super Bowls. So I kept up with the Joneses, but now I got to surpass the Nelsons. But the reality is it's important to make sure that the family is on the same page. And oftentimes this goes back to that pie chart we showed at the beginning of that breakdown of family communication. There's a lot of there's a study was done by I think it was the University of Michigan that found that the number one source of conflict in marriage is conversations around money. So that only gets more conflicting, if you will, as the assets and the balance sheet ticks up. So ensuring that families are on the same page is a critical component, even to just securing the preservation of wealth, which that's not really our primary motivation, but certainly if all you care about is the money, it would be important to be on the same page as your spouse. So we've developed a technique a tool that we actually have done a webinar on that anyone can use called the Wealth Languages to help couples have conversations about money. And then these three key questions are critical. These are the key questions that clients are looking the answer for too. And the way we've written it is for you to read it for yourself, but I'll say it this way: how much is enough for you? If I'm talking to the client, how much is enough for you? How much is enough for your kids? And what are you going to do with the excess? These are the big questions that they need help answering. They've got enough money. There's going to be excess. So really, it's helping identify the finish line. What's going to be the appropriate dollar amount for their kids? One of the biggest questions we get asked is, how do I not screw up my kids with money? So generally, just taking the the new government rule to just do 22.3 million to the kids. Most clients aren't looking to just do that as a baseline, and they're looking to figure out what's the purpose behind the excess. So these are the questions you have to engage on. So Jeff, why don't you share maybe a story or two of what that's looked like with some practical examples for us?
So I would say, thanks, Cal. I think the main story that I would share is we had David Green, the founder of Hobby Lobby, in our office a couple of years ago, and meeting with one of our families who was trying to work on an estate plan about how much do they give the kids. Our clients have 3 kids, and David told this amazing story. If you haven't heard it, there's a book out about it, but or maybe a couple of books about it. But he had kind of done he had listened to the traditional advice that you sort of divide the number of kids you have and grandkids. He had grandkids, and just divvy up the stock of the business, give it a discount because it's illiquid, and move it into the trust. And he had just papered this, and he told us a story with really tears in his eyes that he finished papering that and was sitting on his back porch, just sort of praying, and he felt like God was saying, you may eat of the fruit, but the tree is mine. I didn't ask you to give away the tree. And David was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? He calls this family meeting and has everybody rescind basically their ownership in this. You couldn't unwind it. It's a bit technical the way it worked. But anyway, they did not get the flow from the profits yet. So luckily they hadn't become addicted to it and were willing to kind of just paper it back, if you will. And in our client's situation, and this is the real world, every situation is different. Our client's father-in-law had already given large chunks of the business to his children and grandchildren. And he had grown that business. The father of our client had grown that business from a $20 million valued business to a $2 billion valued business. So he was just wildly more successful than he ever dreamed. And suddenly his grandchildren, where he thought he gave them a few $100,000, he's now given them tens of millions, probably $100 million or so, or more in value. And so it was sort of an awkward moment. David Green is talking about how he got it back from the kids and grandkids. Our client's like, it's already done. And so it really became about, well, first of all, from a strategy standpoint, we are limiting, and Cale's in these meetings with our team. We're not about to give the kids more. They've already got more than they can handle. So now the game plan is, how do we educate the kids to become great stewards? Because it's coming. It's already coming. And so just from a family standpoint, these are the narratives that matter. It's not cookie cutter with the way it's done. So Cale, you want to kind of put a bow on that? And I think this is a good segue into the next box.
Yeah, absolutely. So making sure that you answer these questions that I mentioned earlier, help the client answer these questions. It's not going to happen overnight, right? It's going to take conversation and discussion. And that's why it's really hard, by the way, to answer those questions if husband and wife aren't on the same page. So it's messy, but we think that there's a lot of value to offer in the mess. And that's kind of why we've built this playbook. And that leads us to the last one, the last quadrant, which is the legacy component. And as Jeff just alluded to, for this particular client, one of the biggest things that they needed was preparing the next generation. So I I wrote some content. I call it like internally, we'll call it like Dave Ramsey 2.0. And the reason I say it is Dave, I don't know if anyone knows Dave or loves Dave or whatever, but he built a great program, Financial Peace University. It's fantastic. But it's really built for kind of the everyday, person. Stuff some money in envelopes, get out of debt, etc. Not relatable to families that have $100 million and kids that are going to be inheriting, or at a minimum, they know they're rich. They don't know how much, but they know they're rich. So I built a little program for how do we train that next generation. And we sent out an invite, to see if anyone would be interested. And we got like an overwhelming response from clients. Like, oh my gosh, a lot of them were like, my kids aren't in town, but like, how can we get them there or whatever? So we know that it's a really big felt need, not just with this specific client, but amongst a lot of clients that are in that ultra high net worth category. So having a game plan and a program in a way that you can, whether it's via an event or via one-on-one, preparing that next generation that might be inheriting wealth and navigating the complexity of that, because a lot of times they don't know the number yet. So this is not an easy road, but it's one that entails a lot of relationship building. And if that's enjoyable to you, it's a fantastic road, and it really takes a team in that regard. Philanthropic strategy, we'll give some examples of that, but it goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is a lot of these clients, they want to be generous, and they're looking for help on how not just to execute the strategy from a technical standpoint and reap the rewards of tax benefits or whatever, but also how to build a framework for one of our clients last year, as an example, gave away $12.3 million, right, in one calendar year. Well, who gets $12.3 million? I mean, that's a big question to answer. Who should get that money? And how do you say no to people that come out of the woodwork that hear about it, that are like, hey, I want some of that. Listen to my ministry. Well, it helps to build a framework around what you're passionate about as a family, how you're going to think about where you allocate money. And we want to help families build that if they don't already have it built for themselves. And a lot of them are asking for that. How can you help me build my philanthropic strategy so I'm now empowered to say no to the things I don't care about, and then really understand and be a good steward of where I'm giving to the things I do care about. And the last one, and this is probably the most important, is the full inheritance. So we talk about this a lot. It's one of our favorite things. And the reality is when we talk about inheritance with a lot of families, most people think about it in terms of dollars and cents, i.e. the financial capital. How much am I going to leave behind in the next generation? And as we've already alluded to, that's a big question that clients in this category are looking for your help to answer, or at least talk about. But ultimately, it's probably the most, I would say, least important thing you're going to leave behind. And the way I'll frame these 5 capitals to clients is I'll explain it, right? In addition to financial capital, there's intellectual capital, relational capital, character capital, spiritual capital. These are all things you're going to be leaving behind your kids. And the question I'll ask is, if you had to bankrupt one of these capitals, which one would you bankrupt? And I've yet to have anyone say financial capital, anything other than financial capital. In other words, everyone is choosing financial capital to bankrupt. Well, that now changes the conversation to, okay, so how are you? We've talked a lot about how we're investing the dollars and cents. How are you investing in these other capitals? And that's usually now a pause for consideration. And the fun part is you can use financial capital. If you've got excess, like these clients do, you're now kind of inordinately blessed to fuel these other capitals faster than perhaps other people that don't have the same amount of money would be able to do. So it changes the conversation about how can we invest in and help the family invest in these other capitals. So, and again, one of these big questions that clients are asking is, how do I not ruin my kids with money? And Jeff, I think you've got a couple of stories on what we call giving the gift of the struggle. So I'll let you share that.
So yeah, we like that expression. Thanks, Cale. And where this is coming from, and I had this experience, maybe some of you have had this experience. You don't have to have $100 million to have this experience, but if you grew up where money was tighter in your household as a kid than it is for your kids in your own household, then you probably have kind of a different view of money, maybe value the dollar a little more. That was certainly true in my household. I had to scrapped together money for a car when I was a junior in college, and my parents helped me a little bit. They sort of matched whatever I could save, but I was, 20 years old or so when I got my first car. My kids were in a different financial situation, and they went to a private Christian school, and seems like everybody got a car when they were 16, and they certainly didn't have to contribute much. And so, I would be sort of not so pleased with my kids who I felt, they feel a bit entitled to this. Well, why wouldn't they? They're in a different situation. And so really trying to understand that we have to, even if you got the money to do something for your kids, withholding that, the kids know you have the money. So when I was 16, I wasn't asking. I knew my parents didn't have the money. So there was no discussion about it. When our kids turned 16, we had to have a discussion about why are we not buying a new car, for example, or what expenses might they have to pay? And they're like, well, you can afford it, right? And so we've had different manifestations of, we love talking with clients about how are you going to give the gift of the struggle? We know that the struggle makes you stronger. And if you have more than enough, you have to kind of put an artificial game in place to let them struggle a little bit and build some muscle in this money area and to value the dollar. So we've seen all kinds of things. This is not formulaic, but it's fun to just tell some of these stories. So as we were preparing for this, I thought of so many. We've got one family that says, we will pay for state school. Anything you want to do above that in college, you figure it out. Take a loan, work, whatever you want to do. I call that the cap and trade. Okay. My wife and I were with a guy that's selling his interest in a private equity firm. He's got about $300 million this weekend. And he said, are you kidding? My kids have to save and buy half the car, whenever that is, kind of like what we grew up in the same little town, the way we grew up. Okay, fine, but it's artificial. And he has to explain to them that this is to give them the gift of the struggle. And they'll probably roll their eyes, but hopefully they'll value it later. Look, we have another client who has a very different view. He grew up with wealth. His parents provided for him at a certain level to live in a nice neighborhood, to buy a house he couldn't afford by himself, to belong to a nice country club. He's doing that for his boys. And he thinks that's the Mendoza line that he should provide, a basic food, shelter, and all of those things. And any kind of luxuries, or you want to go above that, that's up to them. Everybody's line is different. We just tell them to pray about it and have peace in the gut and go with what God tells them to do. But at least let's have that conversation about the value of a dollar. So those are just some examples, but we thought you might enjoy that term, the gift of the struggle.
Absolutely.
Kale, back to you.
And I think it goes back to, it's lonely at the top. A lot of these clients and prospects, if you will, I mean, one of the things they're asking, or whether directly or indirectly, is what are other people like me doing, right? And like we said, it's lonely at the top, so they don't know who to ask. And in lieu of that, what the world is saying is, well, buy more stuff, make more money, invest in things you have access to now because you've got a bunch of money. And I'm not suggesting that those things are bad in and of themselves, but the reality is the answers they're looking for are different, but people aren't talking about it. And so as we get more and more stories, as Jeff kind of alluded to, with these client families, we're able to share, well, hey, here's some ideas. It's not formulaic. You don't have to do what this person did, but here's some ideas of how you can execute on things like giving the gift of the struggle, or a philanthropic strategy, or preparing the next generation, or whatever that, or how they're investing in the 5 capitals. So that's just a little taste of what we mean when we talk about legacy in the context of the playbook. So that brings us home. This is the ultra high net worth playbook as we've defined it, and as we've had a lot of success running it here at Archetype with the clients we have the privilege to serve. And so as Jeff said, whether you are serving them now or looking to move up market, we hope this blesses you in some way, shape, or form, and that you walked away with a little more context. But to that end, we definitely want to give some time for questions. So we'll do that now. We've already had some that come in, but if you've got any questions, feel free to type it into chat box, and we'll answer it live. So let's move on to questions. So let me take just reading this from the list of some that have already come in. Okay, how do you find ultra high net worth clients? That's a good question. Jeff, you want to take a stab, or you want me to go?
Well, just real quickly, and this is just the way we've always done it. We're as a company, we're trying to standardize some of these things, and we are establishing offices in different cities, and so we kind of install the offense. And one of the things that's always worked for me, we have some people that are just great at getting referrals from their current clients. That's always a huge component of kind of the organic growth. Another thing that I've always done is just, we kind of know the people. We tend to specialize in folks selling their companies for more than 10 million, that are having liquidity events, that want to be generous. So we kind of know who the lawyers and accountants are in each city that think the way we do, because I've made the mistake before of kind of coming up with these estate plans and then sort of finding out that the lawyers and accountants weren't on board. So people that kind of share our worldview that generosity is important, kind of networking with those folks. And then I've always been very active in the nonprofit world, joining boards and this sort of thing, of things that I was passionate about. I didn't do it to get business, but then you find like-minded people who do those kind of things. So finding out what those organizations, whatever you're just really passionate about and serving the community, a lot of these other folks are thinking that same way and meeting folks that way. Cale, what might you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always like to think about it from a strategic marketing standpoint, which is you have to know where these people are, and you have to know what they're passionate about, and you have to know what the questions are that they're asking. And hopefully some of the content we've given you today will help with that, because one of the things you have to do is create awareness of your own kind of like personal brand or business brand, or however you're operating your business or working inside of a big company. People have to know who you are and that you have expertise in this area. And the best way to do that is to speak their language. So for us personally, we do a lot of like educational content. It's free. We're putting stuff out there specifically to the language that we've learned that these ultra high net worth families are looking for, the questions they're seeking answers to. And that's driving traffic inbound so that we can engage with them. So that's kind of in addition to what Jeff alluded to, which was just being in those key places where those ultra high net worth families might be, that ideally are already in your own natural network. Okay, so let's go to another question. Does age inhibit serving ultra high net worth? I'm assuming you would say clients, i.e. younger advisors. So good question. I'll answer this one if you don't mind, Jeff.
Sure.
So I don't want to say no as a blanket statement. Certainly age can be, right, if you're 27 and you're chatting with a guy that's, in their 60s, and you don't have all the life experience, even you're not married, you don't have kids. Yeah, there's some gaps to overcome. But can you overcome it? Yes. But it really helps if you've got a team around you. So we've been able to make, looking at one right now across the hall, advisor that's, I think she is, well, I won't mention her age, but she's in her 20s, we'll put it that way. And she is an incredibly successful and empowered advisor that there might be that first kind of take when she walks in the room, if it's a new prospect, like, oh, this person. But once she opens her mouth and she speaks their language, all of a sudden that's set aside, because now someone feels like, oh, they get me. And so I think that's the critical component, is if you can take away some of these components from the playbook where you can speak their language. Once they recognize that you know who they are and what their challenges are, that wall starts to come down. I don't want to say it's completely overcome, but it's absolutely 100% possible for younger advisors to serve this marketplace. It certainly helps when they've got a team around them, particularly if that team has some gray hair, like we might have on our team. So anyways, great question. Hopefully that answers it. All right, another question. Do you charge for deeper conversations, or is it included in your overall compensation? Good question. Also, any books or resources recommended for engaging clients in conversations around the 5 capitals? So let's start with the first question. Do you charge for deeper conversations, or is it included in the overall compensation? You want to take that one, Jeff?
Sure. I mean, there's obviously multiple ways to charge for things. We still kind of do the assets under management AUM model. We know nothing's perfect. We've looked at charging hard dollar fees, and we've done occasional hard dollar fees for some planning, but we really are not a big fan of doing that. We do tell folks that, the way we get paid is managing the liquid assets. And, this is a question that we've had before about, we don't try to talk people out of their private investments that maybe are generating the income and that sort of thing. We find that those liquid investments are generally a decent proxy, the management fee on those, for the complexity of their situation. Not always perfect. Maybe sometimes you overperform the fee, outperform the fee that you're getting charged. Sometimes maybe you're getting paid a good fee for doing what you're doing. But we think it's a decent proxy for doing that. And so for the most part, it's included in their fee. And we just think the market hadn't really caught up. We think it's a very hard model. We know there's some people out there trying to do family legacy discussions for hard dollars and having some success, but it's a very difficult model, at least from what we've seen.
And the one caveat I'll add there is I don't know your situation, the person that asked that question, but a lot depends also on what's the fee you're charging. We're a fairly, I would say, I don't want to say premium, but we're certainly not a discount fee. As a result, we believe we're giving value over and above just the investment component. And so that's a key component to this is if clients think that all they're getting from you is investments, and as a result, the fee's been discounted because that fee compression's coming, you've got to now expand your value offering over and above the investments to justify perhaps a higher fee. And so in our case, we feel like we do a great job of that because so much of what we do is over and above the investments. All right, let's do maybe two more questions. We'll see if we have time. We'll try to do a hard stop right at 1 o'clock. Okay, next question. We kind of answered this one. How do you tell clients that are invested heavily, or what do you tell clients that are invested heavily in alternatives or real estate? Again, we focus on the liquid stuff. We're okay with that. Another one is, how do you quarterback relationships with CPAs or attorneys? Jeff, you kind of answered that in your story with the 11-minute estate plan, but anything else that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think I'll just tell a story. You can tell what I'm good at. I just tell stories. Cale frames it all, but he's great at that and putting an organization together. But the stories, that's just kind of what God's gifted me with. And so I always think, when I think about that, I think about this story where we had, this is, almost 20 years ago, and I learned something from it, and hopefully you will too. But I'd gone to this couple. They were probably in their late 40s at that time. The husband, they owned a company that was worth maybe $150 million. And the husband had become a follower of Christ later in his life. And he lived a very different life after he became a follower than before. And so he had a very big life change. But his accountant had been with him the whole time, and she was not a believer. Well, our team enters the picture, and we kind of redo their estate plan, just listening to what the family wanted to do. And it turned from giving it all to the kids to a lot of generosity in it. And this is early in my turn into this world. And so I made the mistake of calling the meeting with the accountant, and she brought the legacy accountant, really almost bookkeeper, and she brought an estate planning attorney that none of us knew. And we start kind of having this meeting about wanting to paper this new estate plan. And I made a couple of mistakes. We started just presenting it, and we didn't really include them in the planning of it originally. So they didn't feel any authorship of it. And they also didn't share the same worldview. So as we presented this plan with all this generosity in it, the accountant, I'll never forget the look on her face. I could still see it today. It was just jaw dropped. It felt like 3 minutes of awkward silence. It was probably 10 seconds. But all that came out of her mouth was, why would anyone give away that much money? I mean, the meeting was over. Okay. And the lawyer felt the same way. They were not on the same page. They had not been included in the planning. And honestly, they were the wrong people anyway. And I should have, as the quarterback, figured that out, found the right kind of people with the same kind of worldview and the skills to do the planning, and had them help author the thing. And so I just tell that to say, I think there are lessons in spending the time, kind of like in our 11-minute example earlier, where I'd learned, go to the lawyer and say, what might you do in this situation, and see if they can solve it. And if they can, great, they're a part of the solution. If they still think you're nuts and don't have the skills, go find another lawyer or accountant. So just a story to illustrate that. Back to you.
That's a great answer. I do want to. Sorry, I didn't mention the latter part of the question we answered prior to Jeff's comment just now about books. So my only caveat with this, there are some books that I think are fantastic. The big caveat though is whether or not the client or prospect will actually read them. So I find really the best answer here is on how to have the conversation about the 5 capitals. To do that yourself with the client, just kind of like I did. I mean, ask those questions, ask them what they think about it. I would engage that way. But that being said, a few books that are great are Navigating Life with More Than Enough, Unprepared, Start Late, Finish Rich. Depending on what they're feeling their tug on their purpose. I really like John Reinhardt's Gospel Patrons. That usually inspires people. Halftime is a great book by Bob Buford. So there's some good books out there that might help them think about, bigger than just the pile of money and what's next, and help with those conversations around the 5 capitals. There's not a book about the 5 capitals, so that doesn't exist, but I would certainly encourage you to have those conversations. All right, we are bumping up. We're at 1 o'clock, so I want to be cognizant and give everyone the opportunity. If you need a scoot, now's the time. We're happy to stick around. There's a few more questions. We'll answer 2 or 3 more, just for the sake of people that ask them if they're interested to stick around. But don't feel the need to do so. We're so grateful that you joined us today. This presentation will be available by recording. I think we'll send it out perhaps to, if you registered for this. I think that's the case. But nonetheless, let me just put our emails on the screen just in case. Where's this share button? So if you've got a question about any of this stuff, Jeff alluded to this at the beginning. We hold all this content with an open hand. We don't have any secrets. So if you've got questions about serving the ultra high net worth marketplace that you want to answer, feel free to reach out to us. Additionally, and Jeff mentioned this, if you or someone might benefit from having a conversation about where we're headed as a business, we're looking to add the appropriate aligned advisors that are looking to move up market, serve the ultra high net worth niche, but also do it in a way that's collaborative as one business. So it won't be for everybody, but if you or someone might want to have that conversation, we'd love to have that conversation with you as well. All right, so a couple more questions, and then we'll close it down. So feel free to stick around if you want to. All right. Okay. What technology are you using specifically for this niche? Good question. Very technical question. Quite a few. So we still do use financial planning software. So we chose Money Guide. There's a bunch of them out there. eMoney's the other probably big one. But in this demographic, it's really more useful. That technology is more useful as an ancillary tool than having that be the conversation. So it kind of changes once you get above that 10 million mark. But Money Guide Pro, you need consolidation and reporting. There's a lot of different softwares out there. We actually use Black Diamond. There's Adapar. I think InvestNet's now got a version for that. But suffice to say that it's not cheap. If you're paying for it, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, buckle up. But reporting and consolidation is critical for this asset class. We use HubSpot for all of our marketing, which isn't necessarily specific to you need that for this niche, but it's really helpful for us to get focused on the data we're receiving about who's clicking on things and why and where, and ultimately categorizing them. That's very helpful to know that they're in the niche we're looking for and how we can connect with them in a better way. So anything that I'm missing, I would say those are three big ones.
I'd say the only thing is, OS 33 is our, we call it Disneyland kind of intranet. And I would just say two quick things. One is security of data. I mean, obviously is unbelievably important. And so the last thing you want to do is have some kind of security breach. So we spend a lot of money on securing our data. And so I think that's super important as you grow and get into this niche. And I think as Cale pointed out, having consolidated reports, we actually have one of our largest families. They came to us because their old, the firm they were dealing with literally couldn't put together a performance report. So while that performance software and consolidation software is expensive, it's totally worth it. It's table stakes in this marketplace. So good question.
Okay. We kind of pseudo answer this question, but how are we seeing these ultra high net worth clients wanting to be billed? So Jeff kind of alluded to this. We kind of went on a listening tour in our first, after we launched, because, we kind of had this blank piece of paper. We could do anything we wanted now. And so we thought, well, heck, let's rethink everything. Let's go see what else is out there. We just knew what was Wirehouse model. And one of the things we concluded from that, Jeff alluded to this, we looked at everything: fee for service, hourly billing, flat fee, et cetera. And there's some groups out there that have found success, and usually different niches, demographics, but predominantly for the ultra high net worth, the AUM model, they weren't looking to do anything other than that. We have seen, there are a couple of firms out there that have done some flat fee stuff. That's probably the closest version to working other than AUM. But it's, again, you got to have a model for it and a justification for how did you come up with this fee and why. So the AUM model for now is still the pinnacle. It's what people want, despite what you read all over the place. Maybe someday that will change. Obviously, if it does, we want to be out ahead of it. But right now, it keeps things simple. It keeps things concise. It keeps things clear. And we, again, per the question earlier, we kind of do provide all the service that we have to offer. All these four quadrants are encompassed within that fee. So we do all of it. So we have done a couple of hard dollar things here and there, but it's been few and far between. And we've tried a few times on some really big numbers to do that, and it wasn't received well. So not to say that can't change in the future. There's not a family out there that would, but that's how I would answer that question. Any other context you would add, Jeff?
Nope. That's good.
For people that do have some questions about the 5 capitals, we do have a resource, a blog post that we put together. So we'll make sure that we send that. I think actually, Kane, I think you already did that. So thank you. All right, last question, and then we'll conclude is, what are some examples of philanthropic strategy? This is a great, Jeff, why don't you answer this question? Because we've actually applied this to our own business.
Oh, examples of philanthropic strategies?
I'm thinking about the context of like, where you give and why. Like, how do you framework?
Yeah. So that is something we try to help with. One side story that's just been ringing in my brain, so I guess I'll share it. Maybe that's a prompting. Gail and I had a meeting with a prospect, and this family had about $200 million, and the patriarch was very focused on sort of Second Amendment issues. Okay, I mean, very, very focused on this thing. And he was trying to get his 2 girls who are in their 40s to kind of care about that. And, it was really an interesting illustration of sometimes you don't have to include your children. I know that maybe wasn't the specific question. Sometimes they're not interested. And if they are, maybe empower them to have a voice. So we have a big principle at the firm: empower, don't control. But just as an example, I think one of the reasons we've been having some success in this area of dealing with successful entrepreneurs is we kind of think of ourselves that way a little bit. Just kind of one beggar showing another beggar where they got bread, if you will. We're on a path to give away the stock of Archetype. We've done that, the first 10% through National Christian Foundation. And and we plan to do more of that, eventually giving away the whole business. And so it's an operating entity that generates profits that get given away. And so we have a member of our team who's very passionate about being great stewards of how to do that and analyzing nonprofits. And so we're going to kind of break that into 3 categories. So this is just a model. I think this is, Gail, where you were going of how to consider sort of doing a framework for giving. So a third of our giving is done for really national and international things, corporate level. A third of it is for things that come up. Maybe it's a natural disaster. We live in Houston. We seem to have one of those every couple of years. But in the cities in which we serve, if there are issues that come up, we'd love to help with those. And then the last third is to me almost one of the most fun, which is at a local level. A third of it gets given away by our teams in those cities, and they can't just write checks. They will write checks, but their hands and feet have to go with those checks to volunteer and serve in person. And so we think that creates some team building. Obviously, a lot of times the giver gets more than the receiver. We just know that that's such a great thing culturally for the business, and a great thing to build the kingdom as well. So anyway, that's just an example of a framework that we use internally.
Yeah. So the only thing I would add to that is, a lot of time we'll ask because it's helpful to, and again, we're just giving them examples, and then they're usually taking this and running with it. So we like a third, what's global, what's local, what's hands and feet that you're passionate about. And then within those categories, we'll usually ask the question, Jeff does a great job of this, of like, what breaks your heart? It's more than just usually one thing, but like, as an example, for my family, like one of the things my wife is super passionate about is human trafficking and sex trafficking. So that's a big bucket. We can do that internationally, we can do that nationally, and we can do that locally. And we can serve for that, but that's a big bucket for us. I'm big on discipleship. That's another big bucket of ours. So helping families think through that and identify their buckets, and also giving them permission, as Jeff said, sometimes the kids don't want to be involved. Or sometimes the kids might want to give the different things that you want to give. So that's another broader conversation, but helping them think through that philanthropic strategy, definitely a critical component to this demographic. So, all right, that being said, we're 10 minutes past the hour. We'll close it down for anyone that's still on. We cannot thank you enough. It's such a privilege and a joy to get to do this. Jeff, any parting thoughts, last words?
No, I would just echo your thanks for joining us, and just please reach out with any questions. We're an open book.
All right, Godspeed.